Welcome to Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. It is time to make nutrition part of the conversation. I'm your host, Christina Veselak, and I'm so glad you're here. Did you know that it's our brain's job to allow us to cope with stress gracefully? But to do that, it needs to be fed optimally. Have you ever wondered why so many committed people relapse or maybe even die? Why so many people on psychotropic medication still feel lousy and still have cravings? What if the missing piece is food, the right food? What if the right nutrients like amino acids or even eating protein every 4 hours could actually balance your brain chemistry and your mood without medication and support lasting recovery? In this podcast, we explore the powerful connection between feeding your brain well, mental health, relapse, and recovery from addiction. We will share insights from experts, inspiring recovery stories, and practical strategies you can use today. Whether you're in recovery, a healthcare professional, or someone passionate about emotional well being, this show is for you. Let's dive in and discover how fueling your body and brain with the right food, the right amino acids, and other key nutrients can fuel your transformation today. Welcome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Power Up Recovery with Nutrition, where we talk to fascinating people who use nutritional approaches to aid people in their recovery journey and prevents relapse. We share amazing, inspiring recovery stories, and we look at cutting edge science. Today, I'm interviewing and have a wonderful conversation with Michael Ferguson, who is really one of the pioneers on the cutting edge of changing how we think about and address attention deficit disorder. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do now, and then how you got into ADHD and addiction treatment and recovery?
Absolutely. What I do now is I've been an ADHD coach. I would call myself a life coach. I know actually I'll talk about in a second why I don't like calling myself an ADHD coach specifically. I work with people all over the world, based off of a podcast that I've been doing since 2015 and a book I wrote called The Drummer in the Great Mountain, a guidebook to transforming adult ADD, ADHD, which came out in 2014. And so my work, I'd say, and what kind of think differentiates me in some ways to other people out there is what I proposed when I wrote the book in 2014 was that ADHD is a neurological type, and to
Mhm.
look at it more like that than a disorder. And the
Okay.
concept of it being using uh, having a viewpoint where you're not waking up feeling like you're broken. But the issue is, and when we get into addiction, is that it leaves you wide open for addiction. We have less dopamine receptors, and as such, stimuli and anything you can get addicted to is connected to the dopamine response. And so,
Mhm.
so much of what I do is connected to understanding those pieces of what's going on in the brain chemistry. How do you support that through nutrition and exercise and also support? And so, a lot of what I do is give talks and give workshops, and podcasts and any way else I can support people in having a different view of what ADHD is. And it's a lot of people who are artists, entrepreneurs, doctors. I work with a lot of therapists, which I would never have predicted going into this, that
Mhm.
doctors, because I'm not a doctor, that they want to work with me. But I think there's a camaraderie amongst a lot of people who feel like they're not broken, but they clearly have struggles with time management, addiction, and in terms and just being able to be on time, something we were just talking about. Those are things that can shift through the right kinds of support, the right kinds of nutrition, the right kind of support program, to where you're leaning on your strengths versus um, just constantly in that space of negative self-judgment. So being able to
Mhm.
navigate through that is, I'd say, a big piece of the work I do.
That's really cool. I mean, the reason I wanted you speaking at the conference coming up in Columbus, which is on using nutritional strategies for relapse prevention,
Yeah.
is because as a relapse prevention specialist, which I spent 20 years doing in Denver,
Yeah. Yeah.
I specialized in the chronic relapser, the person
Hmm.
who'd gone through
Yeah.
5, 6, 7 programs, who were trying to get to 3 meetings a day, and yet
Yeah.
it wasn't working.
Yeah. Yep.
And I found that, well, I found 2 things. One, everybody had in common that they weren't eating regularly or sufficiently and had starving brains,
That's it. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Everybody had that in common. But then everybody else also had different barriers. And one of the big barriers I kept running up against with my clients was their either undiagnosed or not effectively addressed ADHD.
Absolutely.
And it had been part of what had driven their getting into addiction in the first place, but it was being a huge stumbling block for their recovery journey
Yeah.
because they were still struggling with life and
Yeah.
therefore still struggling with the feelings of shame and embarrassment and despair
Yeah.
and, you know, feeling broken. Not only did they have addiction, but they couldn't accomplish the things that their peers were accomplishing. And
Yes.
then in treatment, they were having trouble paying attention to the lectures, and they were having trouble doing the homework, and they were
Yeah.
having trouble getting places on time, and.
Yes.
And for so many people in early recovery, it just was insurmountable.
Yeah.
And off they
That's
went again.
exactly it. Yeah, and the issue there is that the ADHD struggles, you're cueing stress, you're cueing the cortisol, you're which the stress, as you know, it's like that's what perpetuates the cravings. The cravings,
That's
the
right.
people
Sure
have the
does.
relapse right before they have, whatever the thing is, and then they're back to square one again. And so to handle that feedback loop by giving people the support with here's your challenges and here's some things you can do to support them to keep your stress levels down, like
Right.
you said, because life's not going to stop. You're going to have to
Mhm.
manage life, but to be able to have strategies to do it and also to know how to advocate for yourself is a big piece
Yeah.
of that. Because if you can't take care of it's your job to take care of your own nervous system. No one else is going to do it for you. And as you know, many of us have a hypersensitive nervous system. And so we need to
Mhm.
understand how to work with that through nutrition, through exercise. And there's going to be certain situations and work situations and commitments that may be very challenging. I know some people I work with, they were like managers and they just can't, like, we're not the best managers in the world. That's like we're great at ideas people, we're great at therapy. Like there's so many things, teachers like work with a lot of,
Mhm.
but management and doing like secretarial work, you're mentioning that is very
Yeah.
difficult. It does not lean on our strengths. And
It
so
does
as
not.
a
As I
result,
shared with you, yes, I shared with you earlier, I got fired from every single secretarial job I ever tried to get.
yes. Well, and it
Yeah,
led you in a good direction, clearly. Good for you
it
that that
did.
happened.
It
Yeah.
did.
But to
And
know it,
and
but wouldn't it be great to have known that like when you were 17 or 18, where you're like, okay, that kind of job is probably not the best thing for me to do, and I could be much more suited to society by doing something that's more leaning on my strengths.
it would have helped my self-esteem tremendously
Yeah.
had I known that back then.
Yeah. That's it.
And,
That's it.
and we won't spend too much long here, but I think this is where diagnosis is a really interesting topic
Yeah.
because, we have to hold diagnoses loosely and we don't want to let diagnoses define people or stick people in boxes or let them stick themselves in a box. But I know that when I got my formal diagnosis of ADHD when I was 40, after struggling, as an adult until 40, it came as such a relief. It was like, oh, you mean I'm not a bad bad at this and bad at that and bad at the other and lazy and stupid and all these things. You mean I just have a brain glitch? Diagnosis can be tricky because we don't want it to put people into boxes,
Yeah.
or define them, or let them get stuck in their own box and, oh, I can't do that because I have.
Yeah.
But for myself, when I got diagnosed at the age of 40 with ADHD, I had such relief.
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
such relief because it meant that I wasn't lazy, bad at this, bad at
That's right.
that,
That's
stupid,
right.
all of these
Yes.
things that had defined me up until then.
Yep.
And so many areas where I felt like a failure and where I had enormous embarrassment and shame.
Yeah.
I had horrible shame that I couldn't keep a neater house, and
Yeah.
on and on and on. And once this had a name, I could say,
Yes.
oh, it's not
It's
me.
that.
I
That's
have a
right.
brain glitch. Okay, I
Yeah.
can accept a brain glitch.
Yeah.
I'm not responsible for having the brain glitch. Now,
Yeah.
I may be responsible for doing something about it,
Yes.
just like
Yes.
addiction, right? We're not
Hmm.
responsible for getting addicted per se,
Yes.
but we're responsible for doing something about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you can even take a step back and in the book, I re-embraced the hunter-farmer theory of ADHD, which are you familiar with that, Tom Hartman?
A little bit. Can
A
you
little
explain
bit.
that for us?
Absolutely. When I was writing the book, I really wanted to like I just didn't feel right to say a disorder. Like that's doesn't feel right because I know people that are extremely talented who would not label themselves as a disorder, but they have these tendencies. So
Right.
the hunter-farmer theory was the best thing that I could find at the time, and I've gone very deep into this, and I think it's what a lot of people resonate with when from the podcast and things like that. So I coined the term hunter type, and it's sort of a combination of the hunter-farmer theory and neurological type, meaning ADHD is more of a neurological type. So in brief, the hunter-farmer theory proposed by Tom Hartman in a book called Attention Deficit Disorder, A Different Perspective,
Hmm.
1992. He proposed that people who are ADHD are X percentage of the population, and we have the genetics of what would have made us good hunters back in hunter-gatherer society. So up until
Hmm.
10,000 years ago, everyone was hunter-gatherers. That like it wasn't until 10,000 years ago when agriculture came in that then this other way of survival happened. So hunter-gatherers,
Right.
if you were a hunter, you would have to be distractible. You would have bursts of energy, of hyper focus and relaxation after. And that is a
Ah,
very common cycle for a lot of people with ADHD, doing kind
yes.
of day in and day out farmer type activities where you're doing the same thing day in day out towards a goal somewhere future down the road is totally a different way of living and handling
Mhm.
survival. So there's so many now. There's been studies done to see like, is this true? And I just posted a study recently that they're now leaning towards maybe this is actually true, that there's genetics from
Mm,
hunter-gatherers, and that's why a certain percentage of the population is like this. And so you can go
mhm,
down the line of distractibility. You can also look into the lifestyle. They tend to be more creative. There's actually more time
mhm,
for creativity in a hunter-gatherer society. There's much more playtime. It's less arduous. And I do think, and all of our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, everyone on the planet. So this resonates with a lot of people, but it gives ADHD a different way of looking at it. So instead of
sure.
thinking of it as a disorder, okay, you have these certain tendencies. So if you were a hunter-gatherer, you would have a high protein, low carb diet. That would have been part of the diet, right?
True.
You would be doing exercise on a regular basis, but in bursts. You wouldn't be just like doing marathons every day. You would have
Right.
short bursts of energy. And so all of the things that I talk about that are scientifically proven to support ADHD
Right.
fit
Good,
really nicely into that model. And so
good fats,
healthy fats,
right?
exactly, of
Hmm.
course, because you would have to have healthy fats because you're storing that energy for the winter. You would have to have healthy fats. It's a huge part of it. So that just made sense. And I think a lot of people had dismissed that theory for a while, thinking, well, it's not scientific. So, but my argument was it doesn't matter if it's scientific or not. It's a metaphor that really, really works, and you can go down the line. And then there is some science to show that that might be possible. So to me, having that more of a metaphor as a way of looking at ADHD, which is just one way to look at it. Other people have come up with other
Sure.
ways, but I find it to be very helpful because then you can really study that and go, oh, right, you're important. Like, and even a lot of, we have a large, I'd say 50 to 60% women listening to the podcast. And they remind me like there were there were women hunters as well as gatherers. And like
Sure.
understanding that lifestyle is another way people live. This modern society is a relative way of living. It is not the end all be all for how you're
Yeah.
supposed to live,
No.
culture is supposed to be. And so when you have that perspective, then you can kind of reduce that self-judgment because you can say, oh, well, this is a culture that I didn't create. I'm here now. I've got to survive in it, but maybe I can think of it like going to another country where I don't know the language. I'm not going to judge myself for not knowing the language because I didn't grow up here. Because clearly,
Right.
most neurotypical people, farmer types, built this society. So how do we navigate? And that's a lot of what I talk about is like, how do you change the way you look at things so that you can reduce the self-judgment and get back to a place of empowerment again?
Yes, and create a context for yourself that actually works for your
That's it.
brain.
That's
It,
right.
it reminds me of my daughter in elementary school, and she has an ADHD brain
Yep.
and, really struggled. And finally, we gave up on the school system. And where we were living in Denver, we had some options, including a school called, what's it called? The Academy, something, I think it was Academy for Expeditionary Learning,
Perfect. Yes.
where they went on outings
Yeah.
and they went on sailing trips and they did this and they did
Yeah.
that and they were moving and they were right. It
Yes.
was a
Learning
completely
tactically, experiencing the learning, and versus sitting down
exactly.
and reading a book, which is one of the least, you know, humans don't learn that way. Human learn through doing things. And so
That's
I love
right.
it. Yeah.
And while she still struggled because she would hyper focus and then
Yeah.
not pay attention to anything else that was happening around her, and therefore she would miss instructions and she would miss
Yeah.
that and she would miss that,
Yeah.
and she would get into trouble.
Yep.
But other than that, it worked for her.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's genetic too. I mean, that's the other piece of ADHD is it gets passed down. So is it a disorder or is it just a neurological type that gets, but regardless, there's a struggle.
Well,
Like we have to come
I
back
mean,
to,
the problem is, and the reason I think we experience it as a disorder is that it creates an enormous amount of disorder in
yes,
our personal lives and therefore in our recovery journeys. So,
absolutely.
could you speak to how you got into kind of addiction and
Yes.
ADHD?
Absolutely. So I had a relative. So I started doing coaching in 2007. So around the same time I started, and I come from a media background. I own a media company and I'm a graphic artist, I'm a musician. So I came from that background. Um, and I started to slowly move into doing coaching because I found it was like a natural use of my talents and people were asking me for that kind of support. And then I started to build up my own coaching system based on um, what I was needing. I kind of
Mhm.
intuitively I needed because I ran my own company. I needed a life coach. So eventually I found someone that I would say, I just basically said, here's what I need. Just do this in the coaching. I don't want to hear your system. Here's what I need. And they were very generous in their time in doing that. And then I then developed the coaching system out of that I then took to help other people. So around that time, I was working and connecting with a relative I hadn't connected with in a long time who had struggled with alcoholism his whole life from like 16 on. And as
Mhm.
you know, it's much harder when you start younger.
Yes,
It gets
much
much
harder
more
and worse.
hardwired in the worst. Yeah. And so I was trying to support him and I didn't think about ADHD or anything like that. I was just wanting to support him. And he said something that really cued me, which was he said that when I drink, I can think clearly and I can function and I can get things done. And I went, oh,
It was
that
firing his dopamine.
like that's it. That's so it led me down the route of like just trying to help him. Like, okay, well, what is this about? So it got me into amino acid therapy and Julia Ross and the mood cure, Dr. Kevin McCauley's work. And as I was starting to formulate my own coaching practice and helping people who were ADHD, I started to see, well, this book doesn't like I need to write a book because this needs to be out there. Like there's certain things that I have and me, I'm also wired ADHD for sure since birth. And but I was fortunate at a young age, around 20, I started exercising daily. I started cleaning up my diet. And it was like my life turned around. I was just like
Mhm.
someone flipped on a light switch and my life got so much better after that. But I didn't connect it to ADHD or anything like that. I just saw, oh, I guess eating healthy is good. You feel better. So then luckily I kind of was a little bit of a guinea pig of like, oh, I already know this stuff works. And so,
Uh-huh.
but supporting people in getting to that place when habits have been built over long periods of time is, as you know, very difficult. So I wrote the book, The Drummer in the Great Mountain, and then really connected with a lot more people and was able to really verify and solidify a lot of things that Julia Ross talks about, a lot of things that had
Mhm.
worked for me. I hadn't taken it to that level. And so now we have a, big global audience of people that listen to the podcast. And I've talked to so many people, especially in recovery, and I see the struggles, but the struggles are always come back to how do you support the brain chemistry? How like that's like 90%. Like if you get the brain
Mhm.
chemistry right, then time management, support with, life coaching, those things help. But if you don't handle the and some people medication, that's what
Right.
helps them. The problem in what I wrote the book because I wanted to have an alternative to medication because I was starting to see a lot of kids going into college abusing Adderall. And it became
Sure.
and I was going down
It's a
looking
thing.
it's a thing. And I was looking at a lot of some of the darker parts of the web, people expressing like how awful it was for them to go into this path where they were using stimulants and it wasn't helping. And obviously a lot of people that weren't doing it with someone who
That's
was
right.
monitoring them and things like
Well,
that. So
and they weren't given any other option. It was like, this is the only thing we know to do to help your brain. Take these pills.
that's right. And it kind of reinforced you're broken in some way. You need to take these medications. And again, I'm oversimplifying, and I know not everyone agrees with this perspective, and I respect that. But what I've found, the feedback that I get from the podcast, especially from the recovery community, is that um, it gives them a way of looking at themselves where they don't feel that sense of shame. And when you reduce the shame, you're more able to have agency in your
Yes.
recovery.
Yes.
And so to me, that's so as we've been doing this work, uh, neurodiversity has become a a
Thing.
term that now references ADHD, which that was pretty much what I was saying when I wrote the book, neurological type. It's not a disorder. And you're starting to hear now neurodivergent is becoming a real term that people are embracing to
Yeah.
refer to people with ADHD. And people and there's all, everyone's that it's less important what you call it. It's more about letting go of the shame and having a way of looking at yourself that gives you a sense of empowerment. And so all the work we do, the context for all the workshops we do is to support people with that perspective and to get them together so they can interact with each other and recognize they're not the only ones in the world that experience this, which luckily by at this point it's changed a lot since when I wrote that
At this
book.
point, we know this, right? And as
Yeah,
a woman, it's now there are girls and adult women who, we know what it looks like in us. It looks a little different in us than it can
yes,
look like in men, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
Um, I want to ask you in a minute about what are the nutraceutical approaches you found to be most helpful. But
yeah.
a little story here, way, way, way back in the day, probably, oh, I don't know, I was in my early 30s. I was working, I had just met Julia Ross and I was learning about amino acids. I
Yeah.
was working with an alternative MD who had just discovered tyrosine.
Yep.
And now my ADHD was not diagnosed then. I mean, I had
Yep.
no idea I had it. But, she told me, well, I want you to take 1,000 milligrams of tyrosine 3 times a day between meals
Yep.
upon arising mid morning and mid afternoon, which is what
Yep.
I tell my students and what I tell my clients. And
Yep.
this is how
Yep.
you're supposed to dose tyrosine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I tried. Oh, I tried. I
Yeah.
really tried. And
Yeah.
after a month, I called her up and I said, it's not working.
Yeah.
And she said, how come? Are you taking it, 3 times a day, every day, the way I told you to? I said, no, I can't remember. I
Yeah.
try to remember and I just
Yeah.
forget. And then I forget.
Yeah.
And then I forget.
Yeah.
I said, can I, not knowing I had ADD, okay,
Yeah.
would it be okay if I took it with food, with my meals?
Yeah.
And she said, well, I think so. Nobody
Yeah.
knew much about it then.
Yeah.
I think so because it's found in food. So try it.
Yeah.
So I tried it. I had the bottle right in my placemat,
Oh, well,
and I could remember because I could pair it with food,
right. You connected the
right?
habits together. Yeah.
It was the cue. I could use that to cue me to remember. And I called her after a month and I said, it's working. I have more energy. I'm brighter. Now, I had
Yeah.
still had 9 other causes of depression,
Sure.
so I wasn't like completely
Yeah.
undepressed, but I was
Yes.
better and I had more energy and the sun had come out. Um,
Yeah.
and I was probably remembering better because I now had the tyrosine in me
Yeah.
and it was improving my prefrontal cortex functioning, but I didn't know
Yes.
that then. But it started my upward spiral once
Yes.
I could take it with food.
Yes. Interesting. That's a good because I still take it. I just had some on an empty stomach and I'm still on that regimen. It's good to know that that's helpful. I usually recommend it to taking it on an empty stomach. So I love hearing that as a testimonial. That's wonderful.
Yeah. What's so nice about aminos is that they're so flexible and versatile.
Yeah. Yeah.
And while it's better to take them on an empty stomach because you will get a clearer,
Yeah.
immediate response, you can take them with food and it will still
Yeah.
get to where it's going.
Yes. Well, like you said, it's in food. So
Yeah.
that's the piece. So in terms of nutraceuticals, I love hearing that. Yeah. So Julia Ross's book was an eye opener, and I
Mhm.
definitely explored it for myself first because I wanted to just integrate some of these things, especially increasing protein, 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal. And I was like, oh wow, that I remember having this moment of like, oh, this is maybe around during the time I was writing the book, going, oh, this works. Yes, this is
Mhm.
exactly it. And I remembered when I had spent some time living on Kauai and I was eating a lot of fruits and a lot of we lived right next to a banana patch. So I'd have tons of banana. And I remember just feeling so fuzzy and bare, like just having terrible time with focus. And it was like, oh, that's it. And so then integrating salmon, which is, we have 2 or 3 times a week here.
Mhm.
All those things support the brain chemistry. So I think it's important to talk about ADHD to recognize what's going on. So, from my understanding, where the brain science is at right now is that people with ADHD have less dopamine receptors. That's one of the hallmarks of what causes the conditions. And so, as a result, we tend to be restless. We tend to be pulled in by stimuli. It's that condition that
Right.
when
And
you're adding L-tyrosine and protein,
that's
you're
right.
supporting dopamine production in your brain, among
Well,
other
and that's
things.
Dr. Blum.
Mm,
When he
yeah.
first coined the term reward deficiency syndrome,
Mm,
which is the term he uses to describe what happens to people when you don't have enough dopamine D2 receptors in the brain,
yeah.
which is
Yeah.
genetic,
Yep.
and what it sets you up for.
Yep.
And then he discovered that, oh, other neurotransmitters impact the firing of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure center of the brain, as well as other parts
Yeah.
of the brain. And
Yep.
so it becomes this very systematic thing. But it started with discovering that we didn't have enough dopamine receptors
Yeah.
and that taking tyrosine helped the
Yes.
brain over a 10-month period make more dopamine receptors.
That's right. That's it. That is it. So to me, it's high protein, low carb diet, healthy fats, cardio exercise. If you can do it, that to me, it's honestly from what I've looked at, all like the stats from all the time I've been doing
Uh-huh.
this work, cardio exercise is number one. I would say it has the most predictable, quick
Really?
results than anything else I've seen. So
Now,
that
why does that
combined
work?
I think it generates dopamine for one. It also is releasing a lot of other feel-good chemicals. You know, you're relaxing your
You have your
body.
BDNF.
Yeah. And so and you go back to the hunter-farmer theory, it's that short card. And I tell people you don't need to do 30-minute workouts. Do like 10-minute workouts. You can do shorter workouts you need about 10 minutes to get the beneficial results. When I
Mhm.
started doing this work, I started to track every time I ran and what was my mood,
Mm,
focus, and energy levels. I track them every day. And what was really surprised to find is it wasn't just the day that I did cardio, it was the day after. And I would see the results multiple days after. And I went, oh, and so then doing the research, I was seeing, oh, that's what's going on. I think what it does is it doesn't just generate dopamine, it has a way of how it affects the brain, your prefrontal lobe, that gives you a longer lasting hit of focus, of clarity. And said, I've just seen it with all people that I work with. Like if it's hard to do it, the challenge is like we were talking about
mhm.
earlier, to keep that consistency is difficult. And
Right.
so a lot of you've got to you got to hack your way into it, and you got to find simpler ways to do your cardio. And a lot of times there's a sense of like, oh, I got to do 30 minutes or an hour. And so I'm not going to do it today. But when they think 10 minutes, they can go, okay, well, I can get on, go outside, or I can even just going for walks. It makes a huge difference. It's that staying in the house, staring or staying at your desk for long periods of time without moving, your brain waves are going to be
Uh-huh.
disrupted as a result of it. And so a lot
Yeah.
of it is those cues of just getting out and moving around can make a huge difference because you're in from a brainwave perspective, we have more theta wave activity and less beta wave activity. So we want to move ourselves more. We want to strengthen those beta waves and gamma waves so that we have that focus. So when we're in that self-reflective, all fuzzy, everything flooding together, that's too much theta wave activity, not enough
Yeah.
beta wave activity.
Which is why I think in treatment programs, not all treatment programs, in fact, many of them do not engage exercise at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really bad therapeutic decision. And they're also
Yeah.
the ones that have really bad food and sugar everywhere.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I,
Yeah.
but to bring in exercise during treatment every
Yeah.
day or every other day in a really
Yeah.
focused way helps people's ability to engage in treatment. And in fact, a friend of
Yes,
mine
right.
who's an MD did a study on the positive effect of daily exercise on relapse prevention.
Yeah. It just anecdotally, you just talked. I remember James Taylor, the musician, was a heroin addict for years, and he said the only thing that fixed it was hard daily cardio exercise. He says that was the fix. He says once I started doing
Interesting.
that, I was able to maintain my sobriety.
That
So, and
is so,
again, it's
so
sort of that
fascinating.
hunter. I kind of come back to
Yeah,
that metaphor. It's like that we're meant to move. We're in these bodies to move. We're not meant to sit stationary.
that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that I've noticed doing this for a very long time is if you look at the brain scans that Dr. Amen has done
Yes.
of people with ADHD, and then what
Yeah.
changes in their brain once they're on stimulant medication,
Yeah.
you notice that the holes of brain functioning are not just in the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah. Yeah.
The holes in the brain with people with ADHD are not just around the executive functioning area, they're in other parts of the brain as
That's right.
well.
Usually back left. Yeah, your back
Mhm.
left quadrant. Yes, absolutely.
And so, what we've discovered is that we actually need to use all the amino acids in
Yeah.
order to support people in creating a successful life with ADHD.
Yeah.
And so my favorite, second to tyrosine, and I don't need tyrosine anymore. What I do need every day is I need the fish oil every day.
Absolutely. Yep.
And, there's so many studies that show that people, especially boys with hyperactive,
Yes.
ADHD, are very deficient in the omega-3 fatty acids. And once you
Absolutely.
bring them in, symptoms get so much better.
That's
But
it.
the other thing, and my favorite, is theanine.
Theanine, yes. Calming, yes.
I love theanine because what it does is it stops the spin.
Mm,
So that experience when your poor little brain is getting way too much,
yeah.
hitting it
Super
at all at
stimulated.
once,
Yep.
and you're supposed to do these organizational things.
Yes.
I especially
Yes.
felt this when I was supposed to write a disability report on somebody, and I
Oh,
had to
wow.
pull
Yes.
information from different
Yep.
places
Yep.
and organize it. And I would think about this, and my anxiety would just thinking about sitting down and writing a
Yeah.
disability report on somebody
Yes.
or an
Yes.
insurance report. My anxiety would go so high that I couldn't function and I would
Yep.
procrastinate until the very last minute. And
Yep.
then I would just
That's right.
make it happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Surprisingly, the focus would show up because you were in emergency mode.
It was an
Yep.
emergency road and I had all
Yep.
that adrenaline running and I just made it
Yep.
happen.
Yep.
But, and the same thing like my kitchen. I would walk into my kitchen and it would be, where do I start?
Yeah.
There's trash on the floor and there's trash on the counters, and every single cupboard door is open. And it's like,
Yes.
and the dirty dishes in the sink and the dirty dishes here. And
Yes.
where do you start? And it's like, well, do I start here or do I start there or do I?
Yeah.
And then you spin, right? And you
Yep.
spin. And then your
Yes.
anxiety goes sky high and you panic.
That's right.
Well, what we know now out of trauma work and somatic, approaches to trauma is that when you get out of your window of tolerance
Yeah.
into hyper arousal,
Yeah.
you then move in to the freeze state
Yep.
and
That's
you
right.
freeze
Polyvagal
and you
theory.
can't do
Yes.
anything.
That's right. That's
And then
exactly it.
you run away,
That's it. That's
otherwise
exactly it.
known as procrastination.
Yes, exactly. And the distraction that comes from that, that's when the phone and everything else that's going to stimulate some dopamine to lower your cortisol levels and to get yourself back down. That's the cycle. That's the
That's
cycle
the
of
cycle.
recognize and when you're become aware of it, you can work with it. You're like, oh, I'm
Right.
stressed, I'm distracting. Those are connected. And how do I
They
then
are. But
regulate myself
that's
again?
that's where theanine comes in.
Yes. I haven't
Because
worked a
one or
lot with
two,
theanine, so I want to hear, I
try
would
it,
love to hear
try it.
more of your
Just
experience. Yes.
1 or 200 milligrams of theanine within 10, 15 minutes, you'll start breathing again. The to-do list stops spinning like a tornado,
Yes.
right? You can actually say, oh, I can close all the cupboard doors in my kitchen. Oh,
Yeah.
that'll work.
Yes. Yes. And do you
Now,
know what the connection is with theanine and cortisol? Do you have any
yes, it
info on that?
lowers it. So
Okay. Yeah.
so theanine partially blocks cortisol, adrenaline,
Receptor.
norepinephrine,
Yep.
and glutamate.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it calms down all your stress hormones, but it also supports dopamine, GABA, and
Yeah.
serotonin.
Interesting. Interesting.
So it supports cognitive function and
Yeah.
supports self-esteem.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
allows you to then do the doing in an orderly way because it's
Yes.
calmed down your nervous system and
Yeah.
now allows you to focus. They've even done studies where you combine theanine with tyrosine and it
Yes.
improves focus even more.
And see, this is relative. I remember testing out theanine, I think around 2018. And because I didn't find it like a strong effect on me personally, I was like, I don't, I always, I'm always cautious about recommending things that I have not tested out or seen work with other clients, even if
Right.
there's some scientific studies on it, because sometimes I see that and I want to
Sure.
make sure that it's worth. But theanine was one of those things that I think even back then, around 2018, was just starting to be talked about. Yeah, we're just starting
Yeah.
to, I think, from my research. And so this is good. I'm going to come back to theanine again. I think I want to re-explore theanine based on that. I want to hear a bit more about
Yeah,
it.
I started using it, I think somewhere around 2015, but
Okay.
I use it for the spin, panic, freeze, procrastinate cycle,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes.
Which not everybody has,
Yeah.
and you don't always get into it, but when you get into it,
Yeah. You
it
want to be able
it
to
stops.
regulate yourself. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
because it works within 10 minutes and it can just bring you down and you can breathe again,
Yes.
it's amazing.
And you
Now,
don't get the stimulant part of the green tea as a result. You're getting just that one aspect of it. Yeah.
yeah, you're just getting the calmer and the dopamine, the clarity support,
Yes. Yeah.
you see.
All right. I'm
But
taking note of that.
okay, but then Julia Ross has a wonderful story of she was at a working on an Indian reservation giving a conference.
Mm,
And she was having lunch with an older woman who was the organizer of the conference, and the woman's 10-year-old, very hyperactive grandson.
mm, yes.
And they were trying to eat, and this kid was bouncing off the walls and
Yeah.
interrupting them and just
Yeah.
being disruptive.
Yeah.
Nicely. I mean, he was a nice
Yeah.
kid, but he was excited and he was 10 and he was bouncing
Yeah.
off the walls. So Julia gave him 50 milligrams of a chewable 5-HTP.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
And within 5-10 minutes, this 10-year-old kid, 50 milligrams, had calmed down
Good.
and was able to eat his lunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then grandma left the room and he helped himself to the brightly colored hard candy in a bowl on the table
Bounce back up.
and he started bouncing
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
But
That's it.
he didn't like it. So he went to Julia and said, "Ma'am, that medicine you gave me, could I have
Mm,
some more of it, please?"
yeah. Yeah.
So very politely, so she gave him another 50 milligram chewable,
Yeah.
and he was able to sit in the conference for the rest of the day and
Very
actually
impressive.
pay it and
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So all parts of the brain, all the neurotransmitter systems are impacted by ADHD
Yeah.
and can be supported when you really know how to use amino acid therapy in this nuanced way.
Yes. Yes. And giving it's just again having all these tools in your toolkit so you know how to manage your nervous system. That's really at the end of the day, it's like each person then finds the things that really work for them and they it becomes the habit. They found center and they're able to then navigate the world and it's still going to be challenging. I think a lot of people promising to just
Yeah,
fix everything. It's like, no, you don't fix everything. And you need to know that. You need to know it's going to be
right.
a struggle sometimes. And sometimes
Yes.
that does need to be the communication, especially I think in our modern world, we just think, well, we're just going to fix everything. And it doesn't, that's not it. That's not good for you as a human being to think that way. It's better for you to have an awareness of the hazards is what they talk about a lot in nature when they're training kids in nature schools. They said the first thing they teach them is awareness of the hazards. Here's the things
Right.
that can catch you, and as a result they become more alert and more aware of like, oh, and so to have that kind of almost an indigenous perspective on approaching life is helpful, and I
Mhm.
think we've lost that a little bit as we've gotten more civilized.
I think so. And then we all have our kind of, our strengths and our not so strengths.
Yeah,
I can now remember to close cupboard doors and throw away my trash.
yeah,
And, so my kitchen is much more orderly. But
yeah,
my office has piles of paper here and piles of paper
yeah,
here and
yeah,
supplement bottles there.
yeah,
And because it's just like there's too much to keep track of.
Yes.
Now, I know
Yeah.
where everything is and I know where to find everything,
Yeah.
but it's pile, and then the
Yes.
piles kind of slip and slide and they're
Yes.
not nice and organized. And then, right?
Yeah.
So that is still a challenge for me, but I do know how to close cupboard doors.
There you go. I love it. It is, and it's just the modern world. It's just as we were talking earlier, it's like this is just one way of living among what many other ways people choose to live in society. And so you have to navigate as best you can. And it's the paperwork and the admin and all that stuff is the things that get us. But you place a lot of us in front of a group of people, or we're tasked to do something in our strengths, we're gonna knock it out of the park. I work with a lot of people who are in Hollywood and in actresses and actors,
Mhm.
it's like when they're on, man, there's like no one else in the world with the same wiring. They're going to do things that other people can't. And so we
That's
have to
right.
see both sides of the coin. And then managing life. And that's why I think a lot of people who are in Hollywood and in musicians and things like that, they get addicted so easily because what makes them so powerful is the sensitivity. And
Yeah,
as a result of that, it's hard for them to navigate the rest of life. And that often leads to some really dark places.
that's right. And there are indeed brain glitches,
Yeah.
and those are real. And
Yeah.
so finding the foods, finding the exercise, finding the
Yeah.
resources to offset them
Yes.
is is powerful. For
Absolutely.
me, the supplements help tremendously, but not enough.
Yeah.
And then I took a course in medical and dental hypnotherapy in 2001. My ADD had gotten diagnosed a couple of years earlier, and I was managing it. But I still felt it was the bane of my existence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like in this 12 module uh, course, the seventh module was ADHD, and I was just waiting for that module. And as soon as we got there, I
Yeah.
raised my hand and said, "Can I be your guinea pig, please?"
Yes. Yes.
And she did she did a trance thing that did absolutely nothing.
Mm.
And I don't know, she was working with mandalas and circles, and
Yeah.
it didn't do anything. The
Yeah.
next week, we came back into class and she put me into trance. And because she said, how is your ADD really impacting you the most? And I said, my kitchen is a disaster. It's always a
Yeah.
disaster.
Yeah.
And I would rather it not be. And she said, okay, well, who in your life is a really good housekeeper? I said, my sister.
Mm.
She said, okay, imagine you and your sister in your kitchen, and I want you to watch your sister clean your kitchen.
Mm. That's good. Yeah.
So I'm watching her clean the kitchen. She said, okay, how's it look? I said, it's great. She said, okay, so go back to your messy kitchen now. And now I want you to step inside your sister
Mm.
and clean up your kitchen with her from
Yeah.
inside of her. Sort
Mm.
of watch from the
Good.
inside.
Yeah.
Okay, so we did that, maybe 5 minutes. And then she said, great. Now I want you to clean your kitchen in your imagination, but I want your sister to now step inside of you and guide
Mm.
you from the
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, now I'd watched my sister do it twice in my imagination.
Mm.
Lo and behold, I was able to do it myself with her sitting beside me. And that was the end of that
I
session.
love it. That's great.
That was a game changer because over
I
the
love it.
next month, it kind of generalized out
Mm.
to
Yeah.
almost everything, except for my ability to watch the speed limit while driving.
Yes.
Okay, so a year later, they had instated a speed trap between my house and my office, and it got me every time. Now, you
Yeah.
think that I would learn this and like take a different route?
Yeah.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
Um, So I land in front of the judge, and the judge says, "You're about to lose your driver's license. What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I have an appointment with the hypnotherapist tomorrow."
Yeah. Yeah.
And he
That's
said,
it. That was good. The judge,
he
well,
said, "I hope it works." Well, so I'd made an appointment with the same with my teacher, and I said, "Look, everything's great except for that."
yeah.
So she, in trance, we installed a little conductor with the
Mm,
conductor uniform and the conductor hat. And
yeah.
his entire purpose in life was to watch the speedometer
Interesting. Interesting.
and
Yeah.
to tap me on the shoulder if, you know, we exceeded the speed limit. I think that was in 2002, maybe 2003. I've maybe had one speeding ticket since then.
That's great. I love it. I love it. And it's such a great story about how, as you're talking, I was thinking about how a lot of people who are wired this way, we struggle with people pleasing. That's like a really
Yeah.
common thing because our self-esteem's low and we're always adapting to situations. And I always tell
Yeah.
people, think about someone you know who has really strong boundaries, but you love them and you care about them, and they're graceful in how they do it, and see if you can embody that. And that it's powerful when you can like as you said, take it
Perfect.
in. There's other human beings around you to mirror these different things that you can start practicing, and may not feel like it's home turf all the time, but I know in fact one of the people that was one of our first workshop participants went on to do hypnotherapy with ADHD. And I know that it's a powerful thing to give your psyche something to work with, so that
It
because
is.
it's so foreign to you to do this thing. But if it's something that's not external, or you don't, a lot of times we'll have a judgment about something that
Yeah.
the judgment is keeping us from integrating it. And when we can just release the judgment and take it in, like you said with your sister, probably you were growing up, you were like, oh, my sister's just particular. And then to be able to
Yeah.
then embrace it, take it in, you have a totally
My
different experience.
subconscious had watched my sister clean the kitchen enough times that it knew how to do it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
That's
It
it.
just hadn't translated into me being able to do it.
That's it. I love it. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anything else you want to add?
I would say that, the one thing we didn't talk about is just sort of navigating emotions. And I would always
Mhm.
point people to the work of Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. A lot of the work I do is based on needs-based awareness, which
Mm,
comes out of the work of nonviolent communication. And that, again, one of the great game changers in my life, of learning it and then integrating that into my coaching practice, and understanding that needs, uh, as we cover in nonviolent communications, are it's like the atomic nature of our consciousness. Our brain is designed to meet needs. Not only our brains, but all million brains, basically all brains, are focused on meeting needs. And when you can name things like, I have a need for respect, and this, I was triggered because this person said this thing, you come back to a space of centeredness, because that's what I need in that situation, versus that
right.
constant spin of like, oh, that person said this to me, or I'm spinning like this, or I'm judging myself for this. When you come back to my need, I have a need for, I'm spinning on this right now, and I really have a need for self-esteem. Oh, in this situation, I felt like, or I spoke to this person, I felt terrible. And as a result, my need for self-esteem wasn't met. To name those finite number of needs, and to memorize them and learn to work with them, you're
Yeah.
working with the core part of your psyche. And to me, that was another game changer that I share a lot with our work, is just recognizing that needs-based awareness is your friend, and it's how you already work anyway. It's already happening. So to become aware of it, you can then more easily navigate yourself out of your mental spins. Or when you're interacting with your spouse or with a coworker, you have a toolkit that's been well trodden. There's a road that's been worked through thousands of people that have already worked on this, that can help you, so you're not starting from zero. It's not your emotions are no longer a mystery. And so the one catchphrase that I like from Marshall was Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. He said that needs are like our feelings are like the lights on the dashboard to tell you whether a need is met or unmet. And so any feeling you have is connected to some either met need where you're feeling great and you're feeling inspired because something went really well. Well, there were needs that were met. That's why you're experiencing it. That's how our psyche works. Or if something went really terrible, there were needs that were not met. And when you have that toolkit, you can then more easily navigate the challenges of your emotional life. And so I just want to
You
add
see,
that to the mix.
that I think that's a really, really good addition because I use that not just in relationship with other people, but also in relationship to yourself.
That's right.
And so what I
Yeah.
teach my clients, both, people with just mental health issues or just people with addiction issues, is at least 5 times a day. And maybe you have to cue it with either meals or with going to the toilet to remember, but at least 5 times a day, stop, take a breath, notice what you're feeling in your body and in your
Mm.
emotions. Do a
Yep.
quick body scan. So,
Yep.
what this does, the quick body scan immediately grounds you
Yep.
and brings you back home, right?
Get you
From
out of
being
your head and
scattered
into your
wherever,
body. Yeah, that's right.
right? From
That's right.
spinning and being scattered and being out there, it comes
Yes.
back. You're moving into your body. Now, what are you feeling? I'm having these emotions.
Yeah.
What does these emotions tell you about what you are wanting and needing
There it
right now?
is. That's it.
Wanting and needing. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how are you going to appropriately ask for or get what
That's it.
you are wanting and needing
That
right
is it.
now?
Yep.
And it is so powerful. And I remember when I started doing this decades ago,
Yeah.
it over time, I discovered that it was one of the most powerful relaxation techniques in the world.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
seems so simple and so whatever, but it's a powerful relaxation tool.
Yeah.
And when you have like cigarettes, or if you're, smoking THC or
Yeah.
vaping it every hour on the hour, right?
Yeah.
Or you're just unconsciously smoking,
Yeah.
every time you catch yourself reaching for whatever you're
Yeah.
reaching for, to
Yeah.
just stop, take a breath,
Yeah.
do a quick body scan,
Yeah.
from your feet up to your head. What am
Yeah.
I feeling? What am I noticing? Oh, what am I wanting?
Yeah.
I'm thirsty.
Yes.
I'm
That's right.
upset. I'm lonely. What am I needing? Oh, I
Yeah.
need to go to the bathroom. I
Yeah.
need to talk to somebody. I need to go
Yeah.
for a run.
That's it. That's
I
it.
don't need
And
my
sometimes
cigarette.
it takes a
I
while for
need to go
people to
for a
even
run.
figure that's right. And some people don't even like it's not they're not even to the point where they can even know. That's part of it is like even learning what do you even need. I find that I'm so always surprised to see that like, oh, I don't even know. I'll ask people in workshops like, what are you needing? And I don't know. And then that becomes the journey of like, well, what is it that you need? Oh, like you said, I'm recognizing I'm thirsty, or I'm recognizing that yeah, I feel very isolated, and then underneath that is a lot of feeling, and there's a lot of sometimes grief that needs to be processed, as you know. It's like all these things, but to be able to have the toolkit like that. Where you have some
That's a
simple
toolkit.
thing you can keep coming back to and say, like, whatever's going on, I'm going to let the trigger bring me back to center again. Instead of
That's right.
fighting it or trying to force yourself into some process, you're letting the thing that's pulling you in, it's taking you down every time to bring you back to center again.
Well, when I was in my 20s, I think I started therapy when I was 25, and I'd had a lot of trauma, um,
Mhm.
both developmental trauma as well as, acute trauma.
Mhm.
And I realized that I didn't know, I knew I had enormous amount of pain inside of me,
Mhm.
but it felt
Yeah.
like this mishmash of like, yarn where all these different colors yarn were all tangled up together.
Mm. Yeah.
And all I knew was that it just was painful.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
had to ask myself, I had to learn What am I feeling right now? I don't know what I'm feeling. Well, are you feeling angry? Are you feeling sad? Are you
Yeah.
feeling tired? Are you feeling embarrassed? Are you feeling lonely? Right?
Yeah.
And it would be, no, I'm not angry. No, I'm not
Mhm.
this. No, I'm not that.
Yeah.
Lonely. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
feeling lonely.
Yeah.
Got it.
There,
Okay.
there you go.
It's
Need
like
for
it would start
connection.
vibrating in neon, you know?
That's it. That's it. Your body know because it's biological almost. It's not
Yeah,
even your body will tell you when you hit a need. You'll start to relax. Your body will go, oh, that's it. That's what I need. And I tell
yeah,
people like needs are not they're not like you memorizing something. It's about you understanding what your neurology needs, your nervous system. These needs are not
exactly.
conceptual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I had to do that exercise
Mhm.
several times a day for a
Yeah.
couple of years
Yeah.
until I began to be able to automatically put a name to a feeling.
There it
Like,
is. Yeah.
and just like now, I know when I'm angry, I know when I'm lonely, I know when I'm
Yeah.
hurt, right? I don't have to go
Yeah.
through a process.
That's right. You still
But
feel
I
it, but then
I'm feeling it, but now I
yeah,
know exactly immediately what it is. And like
that's right.
as long as I stop, I still have we all have to, right?
Yeah.
Stop, go in, breathe, and say, okay,
Yeah.
what am I feeling?
Yeah.
What I'm feeling.
Yeah.
But
That's it.
initially it was I had to go through this little checklist in my head.
Yes, that's it. I'm glad we touched on this. Yeah, that's it. Because navigating emotions is such a key in terms of recovery. It's a big deal. Having these tools in your toolkit, it takes time. And as you said, it takes time, which sometimes people don't want to hear that, but it does. But it can change rapidly once you have the right kind of support, the tools that you need, and that your self-esteem starts to improve. When you have those things that you know in your life build your
That's
self-esteem,
right.
that's when you can start making because then you can see, oh, you're not just broken, you have all these other gifts and you've
That's right.
and I've never worked with anyone where I felt actually I always tell people I don't ever met anyone who has a disorder. I've never met one person that I've coached that I would say, oh, that person they've got a disorder. It never
Good.
crosses my mind. I just think, wow, I sometimes I think, wow, this person has got a lot that they have to work with and I have a great deal of respect for them as a human that they have to take on this much. But I never think
That's
of people just having a disorder. It's
right.
too throwaway. It
Yeah,
doesn't give you enough, and it's low resolution. Higher
yeah,
resolution it's much more messy. But when people start to learn their nervous system and they know this is how I'm wired, and I might be very different than everyone around me, but I am starting to take to task what this nervous system needs and take care of it, that's when life starts to really change. That's when things just
that's right.
really open up. And then
That's right.
there's that moment where things just really expand and flower for people. And I see it a lot in coaching where it's just like overnight. I will just think, wow, that person just overnight changed. But it was an incremental progress that hit that one point of like critical mass where they really had that grand. So epiphanies happen, and there are moments where things can really change in an instant
That's
or
right.
thing.
That's right.
Yeah,
But the foundational work has been done. Well, this
that's
has
right.
been lovely, Michael. Can you
Yeah,
tell us
wonderful
what you're
speaking
going to
with you.
be talking about at the conference?
Yes, well, much of this. So we'll be talking about what would a nutrition and a support system uh, look like for ADHD recovery? What does that look like? What are the different aspects of it from nutrition, exercise, time management? What are some strategies? How do we approach how we look at ourselves? How do we lean on our
Mhm.
strengths? We're going to go through a lot of what I talk about in the book, and I'm going to take from a lot of the coaching that I do on a regular basis, distill that down into this. These are the most important things that I've found working with people who are in recovery and people who are just ADHD who struggle with whatever that addiction is, because almost I would say 90% of the people in the world are addicted to something, whether it's our smartphone or whatever. So that giving them some tools that they can use right away that will support them, and also with therapists and people who are working with people with ADHD, some of the insights that I've found from just working in this field since
Mm.
2007.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful talking to you.
Wonderful talking to you. Now, if people want to reach you, how do they do that? And this will be in the notes as well.
Yeah, so they can go to drummerandthegreatmountain.com. That's the name of my book, and that's also the name of our podcast. And if they get onto Apple Podcasts or whatever, Spotify or however they're getting their podcasts, if you type in adult ADHD, often we show up towards the top. You'll see a podcast called Adult ADHD Tips and Support is actually the name that shows up when they do the podcast search. And we've got hundreds of hours at this point of podcasts, so they can check that out and go through that. And it's sort of an audio companion to the book, The Drummer and the Great Mountain, which they can find on Amazon or wherever they get books.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Wonderful speaking with you.
Thank you for tuning in to Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. I'm Christina Veselak, your host, and I hope today's episode has inspired and equipped you with new insights and tools to support your recovery journey or practice. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who could benefit from the knowledge shared here. Stay connected with us for more episodes filled with practical advice, expert wisdom, and inspiring recovery stories. Remember, nutrition is a powerful tool in mental health and relapse prevention. Power up your recovery today. I'm Christina Veselak, and I'll see you next time.